Min-jae Park, CEO of Park Industries and the most feared businessman in Seoul, died because of a parking space. Not a car accident. Not a heart attack from the stress of his empire. Not even a dramatic assassination attempt by one of his many enemies. He died because he yelled at a 70-year-old black woman about a parking space at a Whole Foods in Los Angeles, and she pointed her finger at him and said, very calmly, "You know what? I'm tired. You can just go ahead and drop dead." And he did. Right there. In the parking lot. Face first into a shopping cart full of organic kale. The thing is, Min-jae Park wasn't technically a mafia boss. He just acted like one. Ruthless business deals. Hostile takeovers. A reputation for destroying competitors so thoroughly that people called him the Iceman behind his back, not because he was cool under pressure, but because he had ice where his heart should be. He was in LA for a business deal worth $800 million. He'd flown in on his private jet, stayed at the Four Seasons, and somehow ended up at Whole Foods at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday because his assistant forgot to stock his hotel suite with the specific brand of green tea he demanded. And he died. Over a parking space. Because he called a grandmother and a son had a selfish, ignorant woman who didn't belong in this neighborhood. The paramedics were baffled. Perfect health. No medical history. Just stopped living. The police investigated. Found nothing. His company's stock plummeted. His ex-wife threw a party. And 3 days later, at exactly 11:47 p.m., Min-jae Park woke up in his coffin during his own wake. He started screaming. Obviously. The funeral home staff nearly died themselves from the shock. His mother fainted. His business rivals wondered if this was some kind of elaborate stunt. But here's the truly bizarre part. When they pulled him out of the coffin alive, breathing, completely healthy except for being absolutely furious, there was a note pinned to his very expensive Armani suit. It said, "You have 30 days to figure out why I brought you back. Fail, and you stay dead next time. Good luck." The parking space lady. Under the note was an address in South Central LA and a time, tomorrow, 9 a.m. Don't be late. Min-jae Park, who had never followed anyone's orders in his entire adult life, who had built an empire on making other people wait for him, had absolutely no idea what to do. Because the woman who'd killed him with a sentence had just brought him back to life with a note. And the worst part? He could feel it, a weird tug in his chest, like an invisible string connecting him to something. Every time he thought about ignoring the note, the tug became a sharp pain. When he imagined just flying back to Seoul and forgetting this ever happened, his heart literally skipped beats. She hadn't just brought him back to life. She'd leashed him. So the next morning, Min-jae Park, still wearing the suit they'd dressed him in for his funeral because all his other clothes were being shipped back to Seoul, got into a taxi and gave the driver an address in a neighborhood where his corporate security team would have absolutely forbidden him to go. The building was a community center. Painted murals on the walls. Kids playing basketball in the yard. Gospel music drifting from somewhere inside. And sitting on the front steps, wearing gardening gloves and a smile that suggested she'd been expecting him, was the woman from the parking lot. She looked exactly like someone's sweet grandmother. Floral dress. Comfortable shoes. Reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. "You're late," she said pleasantly. "I'm not late. I'm exactly on." He checked his watch. 9:02 a.m. He'd never been late to anything in his life. She stood up, dusted off her dress. "My name is Dorothy Williams. I'm 73 years old. I've been a widow for 12 years. I have 5 grandchildren. And I am what you might call a root worker. Some people say witch, but I find that term lacks nuance. I killed you because you were rude. I brought you back because I have a job for you. And you're going to say yes because deep down, under all that expensive cologne and arrogance, you know you deserve a second chance. Don't you?" Min-jae opened his mouth to argue. But nothing came out. Because she was right. The job was not what Min-jae expected. He'd imagined something dramatic, stealing a sacred artifact, breaking some kind of curse, maybe fighting a demon in a mystical battle between good and evil. The actual job was helping Dorothy run a community garden. "I'm sorry, what?" Min-jae stared at her. "A community garden," Dorothy repeated patiently. "We grow vegetables for the neighborhood. Teach kids about sustainable agriculture. Provide fresh produce for families who live in a food desert. It's very rewarding. I'm a billionaire CEO. I run a multinational corporation. I have board meetings and... You ran a corporation, Dorothy corrected gently. You're currently legally dead. Your CFO is running things now. And from what I've read in the business section, he's doing a better job than you ever did. That stung more than Min-jae wanted to admit. Why would you bring me back to life just to garden? Dorothy settled into a folding chair and gestured for him to sit. He didn't. She waited. Eventually, because his feet hurt and his pride was already dead, he sat. Min-jae, she said, do you know what I saw when I looked at you in that parking lot? An inconvenience blocking your parking space? I saw a man who'd forgotten how to be a human being, who treated people like obstacles, who measured worth in dollar signs and power in fear. I saw someone so disconnected from real life that dying was going to be the only wake-up call loud enough to reach you. She pulled out her phone, a smartphone that surprised him. He'd unconsciously assumed she'd have a flip phone, and showed him a video. It was security footage from the Whole Foods parking lot. He watched himself yell at her. Watched the entitled rage on his own face. Watched her simply point at him and speak. But there was more footage after he fell. The video showed Dorothy calmly calling 911, performing CPR, staying with him until the paramedics arrived, telling them she was his aunt so they'd let her ride in the ambulance, sitting in the hospital waiting room for 3 hours until they pronounced him dead. You tried to save me? Min-jae's voice cracked slightly. Of course I did. I'm not a monster. I just knew you needed to die to start living. Now, the garden opens in 30 minutes. You're going to help me water the tomatoes. And then you're going to meet the people you've spent your entire life being too important to notice. The first person he met was Marcus, age 9, who informed Min-jae that he was wearing dead people clothes and should probably change. The second was Mrs. Chin, who ran the neighborhood dumpling shop and had opinions about Min-jae's posture while watering plants. The third was James, a former stockbroker who'd lost everything in 2008 and now taught financial literacy classes at the community center while living in a studio apartment and driving for Uber. Wait, Min-jae said when James mentioned his background. You worked at Goldman Sachs? For 12 years. Made partner. Had the house in Connecticut, the whole package. Then the crash happened, and I made some bad bets trying to save my clients. Lost everything. James shrugged. Best thing that ever happened to me, honestly. How is losing everything the best thing? James smiled. Because I finally figured out that having everything isn't the same as being happy. Over the next week, Min-jae learned that helping in the garden actually meant teaching kids about business principles, which Dorothy insisted was important. Helping Mrs. Chin set up an online ordering system for her dumpling shop. Reorganizing the community center's disastrous bookkeeping. Learning, very slowly, to tell a tomato plant from a weed. And every single day, Dorothy would look at him and ask, Figured it out yet? Figured out what? Why I brought you back. He hadn't. But something strange was happening. The tightness in his chest, the constant anxiety that had driven him for 20 years, was loosening. He woke up without immediately checking his stock portfolio. He spent an entire afternoon teaching Marcus basic accounting and forgot to be annoyed about it. And then, on day 7, something happened that changed everything. A young man showed up at the community center looking for Dorothy. He was Korean. Mid-20s. Nervous. Wearing a cheap suit that he'd clearly bought for a job interview. Min-jae looked up from the tomato plants and froze. Because the young man looked exactly like Min-jae had at that age. Can I help you? Dorothy appeared from the greenhouse, wiping dirt from her hands. I'm looking for Park Min-jae, the young man said in Korean. Then, catching himself, sorry. I'm looking for Park Min-jae. I was told he might be here. Dorothy's eyes flicked to Min-jae, then back to the young man. And you are? I'm Park Ji-won. He's my father. The world tilted sideways. Min-jae stood up so fast he knocked over a watering can. That's impossible. Ji-won turned to him. His face went through several emotions very quickly. Shock, recognition, anger, hope, all of them competing for space. You're alive, Ji-won whispered. The news said you died, but then I heard rumors you were seen in LA, and he stopped. Started again. I'm your son. My mother was Sarah Kim. You dated her for 3 months 26 years ago before you broke up to focus on your business. Min-jae's legs stopped working. He sat down hard on the ground. Sarah Kim. He remembered her. Barely. A brief relationship during his early ruthless climb to power. She'd wanted more than he could give. He'd chosen work. They'd parted ways. She never told you she was pregnant, Ji-won continued, his voice shaking. She said you'd made it clear you didn't want complications. So she raised me herself. Worked 2 jobs. Put me through school. Is she? She died 2 years ago. Cancer. The words landed like physical blows. She told me about you before she died. Said I had a right to know. But she also said. Ji-won's voice hardened. She said you were the kind of man who measured people's worth by their bank accounts. That you'd probably look at me, a kid raised by a single mother in a 1-bedroom apartment, and see nothing but disappointment. Min-jae wanted to argue. Wanted to defend himself. But he couldn't. Because 2 weeks ago, that's exactly who he'd been. Dorothy, who'd been listening quietly, spoke up. Ji-won, honey, why don't you come help me with something in the greenhouse? Give your father a minute to process. As they walked away, Min-jae heard Ji-won ask, how do you know him? Oh, I killed him and brought him back to life. Long story. The casual way she said it would have been funny if Min-jae wasn't having what might technically be classified as an emotional breakdown in a community garden. He had a son. A son who'd grown up without him. A son whose mother had died thinking Min-jae was too shallow to be a real father. And the worst part? She'd been right. James found him 20 minutes later, still sitting in the dirt. You okay, man? I have a son. Yeah, Dorothy mentioned that. Heavy stuff. I didn't know. I swear I didn't. I believe you. But not knowing doesn't mean it didn't happen. The question is, what are you going to do about it now? Min-jae looked toward the greenhouse where Dorothy and Ji-won were talking. Through the glass, he could see his son laughing at something Dorothy had said. I don't know how to be a father, Min-jae admitted. I don't know how to be anything except what I was. Well, James said, settling down next to him in the dirt. Lucky for you, you've got time to learn. And a very pushy witch making sure you do. That evening, Dorothy invited both Min-jae and Ji-won to dinner at her house. Her home was small, warm, filled with photos of grandchildren and the smell of something delicious cooking. They sat at her kitchen table, Min-jae, who usually ate at restaurants where reservations required 3 months' notice, and Ji-won, who looked as uncomfortable as Min-jae felt. Dorothy served pot roast. And then she said, okay, here's how this is going to work. You two are going to talk. Really talk. Not corporate, let's schedule a meeting, talk. Real conversation. I'm going to be right here making peach cobbler, so don't even think about running away or getting weird. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Ji-won said, why did you come to LA? Business deal. $800 million acquisition. Did you close it? No. I died before I could. Because of a parking space? Because I was an asshole to the wrong grandmother. Ji-won laughed. Actually laughed. My mom would have loved that. She always said karma was real. Your mother, what was she like? As a parent. And Ji-won told him. About scraped knees and bedtime stories. About working double shifts so he could take piano lessons. About teaching him to cook because she said a man who can't feed himself isn't really independent. Min-jae listened. And with every story, he felt the weight of everything he'd missed. I'm sorry, he said finally. I'm sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry your mother had to do it alone. I'm sorry for being the kind of person who wouldn't have been a good father even if I'd known. Ji-won's eyes filled with tears. Are you a good father now? I don't know. But I'd like to try to be. The next 3 weeks were the strangest of Min-jae's life. He moved into a studio apartment above the community center. His first time living anywhere that didn't have a penthouse view and a doorman. He spent mornings in the garden with Dorothy, learning about things that actually grew when you took care of them instead of just extracting value until they broke. He spent afternoons helping James teach financial literacy classes, discovering that his ruthless business instincts could actually be used to help people instead of destroy them. And he spent evenings with Ji-won, learning how to be a father to a 26-year-old who didn't need a father but maybe wanted one anyway. It's small. Coffee. Dinner. Ji-won teaching Min-jae how to use the community center's ancient espresso machine. Your mother taught you to cook? Min-jae asked one evening as Ji-won made them dinner in Dorothy's kitchen. Yeah, she said. Ji-won paused. She said her biggest fear was raising me to be useless. Like rich people who don't know how to do anything for themselves. She was talking about me, Min-jae said quietly. Maybe, but you're learning now. That's what matters. One night, Ji-won asked, what was it like? Being dead? Min-jae thought about it. Peaceful. Quiet. Like sleeping without dreams. Were you scared? No. That's the weird part. I wasn't scared at all. I was just done. And now? Now I'm terrified every single day that I'm going to mess this up. That I'll revert to who I was. That I'll lose you before I even really get to know you. Ji-won smiled. Good. Fear means you care. But the real breakthrough came on day 23. Marcus, the 9-year-old from the garden, showed up at the community center crying. His mom had just lost her job. They were going to lose their apartment. Min-jae's first instinct, the old Min-jae, was to write a check. Fix it with money. Move on. But instead, he sat with Marcus. Asked questions. Learned that Marcus's mom was a graphic designer who'd been laid off when her company downsized. And Min-jae realized he knew 12 companies that needed graphic designers. He'd built a career on connections. He made 3 phone calls. By the end of the day, Marcus's mom had 2 job interviews and a freelance contract. No money exchanged. Just connections used to help instead of exploit. That night, Dorothy found him in the garden, sitting alone with the tomatoes. You figured it out yet? She asked. I think so, Min-jae said slowly. You didn't bring me back to punish me. You brought me back to show me that all the skills I used to destroy could be used to build instead. That power doesn't have to mean making people afraid. It can mean making them safe. Dorothy sat down beside him. Close. But not quite. Then what? She smiled. I brought you back because I knew you were redeemable. And because Ji-won needed a father. And because sometimes the universe gives us second chances when we don't deserve them, just because someone somewhere believes we might be worth the trouble. Wait. You knew about Ji-won before you killed me. Sweetheart, I know everything. I'm a 73-year-old black woman who's been working roots for 50 years. You think I just randomly kill people in parking lots? But how did you? Sarah Kim and I were friends. Met at a grief support group after my husband died. She told me about you. About Ji-won. About her cancer diagnosis. Before she died, she asked me to look out for her boy. Said he was gonna need guidance when she was gone. And I looked into your life, Min-jae, and I thought, here's a man who has everything except what matters. And here's a young man who has nothing except what matters. Seems like they should meet. So you killed me. I gave you a reset button. You're welcome. Min-jae started laughing. Actually laughing. You're absolutely insane. Yep. And you're alive because of it. What happens when the 30 days are up? Well, that depends. Have you learned what you needed to learn? I think so. Then you get to keep living. Simple as that. And if I hadn't learned? Dorothy shrugged. Then you'd drop dead again, and this time I'd let you stay that way. But I had faith in you. Sarah did too, even if she didn't know it. Day 30 arrived. Min-jae woke up expecting something. A test. A final challenge. Divine judgment. Instead, he found an envelope under his door. Inside, a plane ticket to Seoul. First class. Leaving that afternoon. And a note from Dorothy, your company's board wants you back. Your CFO resigned. They're offering you CEO position again, full control, no questions asked. The choice is yours. Everything he'd built. Everything he'd lost. Being offered back to him on a silver platter. He found Dorothy in the garden, of course. Where else would she be? I could go back, he said. You could. Run the company the right way this time. Use it for good. You could do that. But I'd be returning as a man who legally died and came back. That's going to raise questions I can't answer. Dorothy pruned a tomato plant. Or you could stay here. Help me expand the community garden program to 10 more neighborhoods. Use your business expertise to help people like James and Marcus's mom. Teach Ji-won everything you know about building something that lasts. That doesn't sound like a billionaire CEO's life. No, it sounds like a human being's life. Min-jae looked around the garden. At the tomatoes he'd learned to grow. At the kids playing basketball. At the community center where he discovered that teaching a 9-year-old about compound interest was more satisfying than closing a billion-dollar deal. And he thought about Ji-won, who'd slowly, carefully started calling him Dad instead of just Min-jae. If I stay, Min-jae said slowly, what happens to the company? Your CFO already proposed a worker-owned cooperative model to the board. Very progressive. Stock would be redistributed to employees. You'd hate it if you were still the old you. And if I'm the new me? The new you would probably think it's brilliant. Min-jae pulled out his phone. Called his former assistant, in Seoul. Mr. Park, you're alive. The board said. Tell the board I'm officially retiring. Support the cooperative model. And transfer $50 million from my personal accounts to a new nonprofit I'm starting, the Sarah Kim Foundation for Single Parents. Silence on the other end. Mr. Park, are you feeling all right? For the first time in my life? Actually, yes. He hung up. Dorothy was grinning. That was dramatic. I learned from the best. So you're staying? I'm staying. But I have one condition. What's that? You teach me everything you know about root work. Dorothy laughed so hard she had to sit down. Honey, you can't learn root work. You're not. I don't want to learn to kill people. I want to learn to help them. You said you've been doing this for 50 years. That's 50 years of wisdom about reading people, understanding what they need, helping them find their way. That's what I want to learn. Dorothy studied him for a long moment. Then she stood up, brushed off her hands. All right. But first, you're going to learn to make a proper pot roast. Can't be my apprentice if you can't cook. 1 year later, the community center had expanded to 15 neighborhoods. The Sarah Kim Foundation had helped 847 single parents start small businesses. Min-jae had learned to make pot roast, collard greens, and a decent peach cobbler. And Ji-won had moved into the studio apartment next to his father's. They had Sunday dinners at Dorothy's every week. It was non-negotiable. On the anniversary of his death/resurrection, Min-jae stood in the Whole Foods parking lot. Same store. Same parking space where he died. Ji-won stood beside him. This is weird, right? Ji-won asked. Coming back here? Completely weird. But Min-jae had needed to come. Needed to stand in the exact spot where his old life had ended and his real life had begun. Do you ever miss it? Ji-won asked. The company? The power? Sometimes. Usually around 3 a.m. when I'm fixing the community center's toilet because we can't afford a plumber. Ji-won laughed. But then I remember, Min-jae continued, that I have Sunday dinners with my son. That I know Marcus's favorite subject is math. That Mrs. Chin saved me the last dumpling because she knows I had a hard day. That's worth more than any empire. They walked into the Whole Foods together. Min-jae grabbed a cart. And there, in the produce section, he saw an older white man berating a young cashier about the price of organic avocados. Getting louder. Getting meaner. The old Min-jae would have walked past. Not his problem. The new Min-jae walked up to the man and said, very politely, "Excuse me. I think you dropped this." He handed the man a $20 bill. The man looked confused. That's not mine. I know. But you seem upset about prices. So this is on me. Buy your avocados. And maybe remember that the person you're yelling at is someone's daughter who's doing her best. The man's face went through several changes. Then, quietly, thank you. I'm sorry. He apologized to the cashier and walked away. Ji-won stared at his father. Did you just defuse that with kindness and money? Dorothy taught me that sometimes people are mean because they're hurting. And sometimes $20 solves more problems than $20 million. That's very wise. I learned from a witch. They were loading groceries into the car when Min-jae's phone rang. Unknown number. Hello, Mr. Park? This is Detective Chin, LAPD. We're reopening the investigation into your death last year. There are some irregularities in the medical examiner's report, and we need to ask you some questions about. Min-jae looked at Ji-won, then at the parking space where he died. Then he started laughing. Detective, I appreciate your diligence. But I'm going to have to decline. I was dead for exactly the right amount of time, and I'm good now. Have a nice day. He hung up. You just hung up on the police investigating your own death, Ji-won said. Yep. That's insane. Welcome to my life. Well, my second life. Technically my first real life. That night, at Sunday dinner, Dorothy raised her glass. A toast, she announced. To Min-jae, who died an asshole and came back a human being. That's beautiful, Dorothy, Min-jae deadpanned. I'm 74. I'm allowed to be blunt. Wait, Ji-won said suddenly. Dorothy, you're 74? Last year you said you were 73. Dorothy smiled mysteriously. Did I? Min-jae went very still. Dorothy, how old are you actually? Old enough to have learned that age is just a number, and death is just a suggestion, and the best magic in the world is helping someone become who they were meant to be all along. She winked. Min-jae and Ji-won exchanged glances. How many people have you killed and brought back? Min-jae asked slowly. Oh, honey, you're the first one who is worth the trouble. She raised her glass higher. Now drink your wine and eat your pot roast. And tomorrow, Min-jae, you're teaching that advanced business class at the center. Those kids need to learn that you can make money and make a difference. And Min-jae Park, former billionaire CEO, current community organizer, resurrected human being, smiled at his son, nodded to the woman who'd killed him and saved him in the same breath, and thought, death was the best thing that ever happened to me. But coming back to life? That was even better.